Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be hosting and to be able to introduce Professor Jeni Cross for today's seminar. Jeni's going to be talking about the science of team science. I thought I would very briefly tell you a little about the kind of team science that she does and the level of interdisciplinarity that she has. So I think that's something that's very important in probably all of the team science that we are involved in. So I was looking through Jeni's CV in history. She's had a distinguished career from her PhD at Davis, now at CSU for several years. And she's had numerous awards for teaching and scholarship and so on. But I was also really surprised looking at her grant support, which ranges from NIH through to the National Endowment for the Arts. So is anyone here got that combination on their grant portfolio? No, that's hard, right? And in addition to that, many other philanthropic foundations and areas that are more traditionally science supported as well. Jeni's work covers the science of team science, but also ranges across a number of different areas, many of which are interesting to me as well: sustainability, behavioral norms, behavioral change. Super interesting research across a range of areas. So I'm not going to take any more of your time. I'll let you get going on telling us about the science of team science.
Yeah. So thanks for that introduction. I love that you kind of looked at my stuff and decided what to say and not just a canned thing. It's really exciting for me to be here with you all today. And I don't know what my count is now. I know that when I went out for a full, I was published in 13 fields of science, from nursing and professional school counseling to civil engineering. And now I'm published in the Encyclopedia of Limnology, which, yeah, when they asked me to contribute, I was like, what is limnology? So, I was 50 years old when I learned what limnology is. So anyway, I love doing interdisciplinary science. I always have really loved it, which is kind of how I ended up here doing team science. So really delighted to be with you all. First, a tiny little bit of framing. Did you know that right now we are in an incredible era of transformation in science? My 16-year-old son says super insightful things all the time, and he said to me once, several years ago, he said, "Mom, did you know that today is the peak of technology on the planet? And today is going to be the peak of technology on the planet for the rest of your life. You are going to live at the peak of technology on the planet." So I just want you guys to know how exciting it is that you are living in the transformative era of science. And if you don't have that historical reference, you're kind of missing the boat. So how is science growing? It's getting more complex. We have this era of open science and very big science. We have new analytic and computing power that we never had. When I was in grad student, I was listening to the radio and NPR was talking about, the internet, and we haven't even imagined what it will do yet. And I was like, whatever, these guys don't know. I was 20-something and really naive. And yeah, we do. We have all kinds of computing power in the cloud and on the internet that I never, ever could have imagined 30 years ago. So, but our teams are growing too. And sadly, there are some paradoxes that are keeping us down. Number one, rare discoveries in science, rare combinations are what contribute to those discoveries. And they get higher citation rates. But they're really hard to do. It's slower to publish. It's harder to get funding. When people read your stuff, they're hardly qualified to review you because everybody who's qualified to review has already been conflicted out. And so then people interpret your stuff as being non-innovative when it actually is the most innovative. So funders are having real problems figuring out how to support the most innovative science. And truly novel stuff is kind of missed in the process. So the people that are successful are funders like DARPA and the newly formed ARPA-H that have a tolerance for failure and high risk and high reward and reward long-term success. But there's one little secret. There are a lot of funders that don't do this well, but some do. Some foundations, the ARPA programs do, and local universities can actually invest in novel, transdisciplinary, and that's actually where some of the engine of change is coming from. So this is a little background for you. We're going to talk about how your team is the solution. But one of the things I study is social change. And I'm a sociologist, so we, like ecologists, like to think across the levels. We think about how does agency interact with groups and with organizations and institutions and regulations and society. And the hardest things to change are organizations and institutions. They are resistant, they are intransigent. That's why one of the best known sociologists, Max Weber, studied bureaucracy. We're still living and constrained and frustrated by bureaucracy every day. So the problems that are happening right now that are challenging scientists are that every scientist I know is suffering from collaboration overload. How many of you, and I'm gonna ask for a show of hands, how many of you are like, I'm kind of exhausted and I don't have time to really do the things I want. I don't have time to read. I don't have time to think deeply. Everybody, hands up. The only people who shouldn't have their hands up are first-year grad students. They're not there yet. Our organizations have baked this into our processes. Our institutional structures have not yet figured out how to change, though I did hear that your university actually has made some innovation space in how it thinks about how to support faculty in this space. So be thankful that you have an institutional structure that supports you. Roles and responsibilities. Most of us are doing too many things. The worst player in my department is a full professor who should have retired when I turned 35, but it didn't retire until I was 52. He worked in the department every day of my life. That's not it. It's an actual fact. He actually started working in my department in September. I wasn't born until January, so. Yeah, I'm not kidding. And he was in a dinner club with my parents. I have the fortune of living and working in my hometown. So he used to joke when he introduced me, "Hi, this is our newest faculty member, Dr. Cross, and I've known her since she was in footed pajamas." Quite literally do have photos of me in footed pajamas. But anyway, when I turned 40, I thought, why is this guy still here? But he did the super selfish, protective for him, but really bad for the department thing. Every year, he just looked at his list of things to do, and he said, what are the things I don't want to do? And I'm going to just check it off and stop doing it, which was great for him and not great for us. However, I'm going to encourage all of you to think about that little star on the right there, that you all are probably doing too many things. We're going to talk about how to get rid of some of those things, but not in a destructive to the whole kind of way. One of the things we're struggling with in this new era is that the standards that we use to define what is good science and what is success, they do not hold anymore. Dr. Sarah Davies, a PhD in biology, last year, right before I went and gave a talk on this, put out this fabulous quote the week before my talk that said that senior faculty members, probably like the dude in my department who just stopped doing anything, told her that any paper with more than 5 authors is not a serious contribution to science. To him and all of y'all, I want to tell you, we are now in the 21st century. And sometime around the year 2000, we crossed over from 1 or 2 things being the norm to 5 or more authors. Now, I know some of you have published some stuff and are like, okay, but ditch the hyper-authored papers. Even with the hyper-authored papers going out, we're still, most people are publishing with several people, not with 1 or 2, even in the social sciences. So we're in a new era, and our standards have to be different. We have to understand what team science is and what it means, and to reward it. So here's the first thing. Tony, this is for you. This was published in 2019, The Characteristics of a Translational Scientist. We need, in order in this new era of team science to be successful and innovative, we need people to be different than individual domain experts and rigorous researchers. Now, I don't know about you, but comprehensives in my department look like a theory exam, a research methods exam, and then another kind of exam in your topical area. So we're really knocking it out of the park on training people to be rigorous researchers and domain experts. But you know what? On all of our teams, we need other things. We need people who are good team players. We need people who are skilled communicators. We need people who are boundary crossers. And some people are naturally boundary crossers. We need people who are systems thinkers and process innovators. How many of you have taken a class where you've been trained to be a process innovator? Anybody? Oh, where?
Not through my professional setting. It was actually for
Yeah. Okay. So these skills that we need to be good team players are not being taught to us in our PhD programs. So that's my first challenge to you, is recognizing that our training and our social norms are lagging way behind the kind of innovative science that we're trying to do. So what predicts team performance? The things I'm going to share with you come from the field of sociology. They come from the field of communication studies. They come from creativity studies. They come from organizational change literature. And they come from people who study teams and scientific teams in particular. But the science of team science, a nerdier name could not exist, is the study of scientific teams. Now, why do we have to study scientific teams differently from other teams? Well, the first is their institutional context. They are in institutions that are centuries old and are very slow to change and may or may not have silos that prevent people from working together, and they're lacking incentive structures, and they have dinosaurs in the department who think that the standards for independence in research looks like it did in 1962. So we should be really thinking about what are metrics for team performance. So here's what we know about teams from a variety of places. I promised to talk on networks and social science because that's the thing that really is my jam. I asked people this morning, what's your passion? My passion is social network analysis because I think that connection is the thing that makes the world go round. So when we think about network performance, there are three kind of big things happening inside networks. The first is the structure. How is the network itself connected to each other? And whether or not people are connected through triangles or long chains makes a difference to how the network performs. There are relational things. How much do I trust you? How much do you trust me? How much do we have past history with each other? How many different types of ties do we have? Those relational things are predictive of team performance. And the characteristics of the team, our individual traits. When we talk about diversity on teams, diversity can mean 50 things. It can be disciplinary diversity. It can be personal history diversity. It can be cognitive diversity. Some people like me are fast thinkers and fast talkers. That's really annoying to people like my friend Hiram, who are like, slow it down, Jen. Can't follow what you're saying. So there are so many attributes that we all have, but there are these things inside of us, our brains, and human beings have some patterns. We seek similarity. We build relationships with people who are similar, and we have a bias towards conversations that focus on our sharedness instead of on our divergence. And that psychological trait, the preference for convergence over divergence, actually prevents us from harvesting the brilliance that might come from all of those different people. So all those things influence network performance and whether or not we build the capacity to share information and to flow knowledge across a diverse group of people. So as our teams get bigger, if we're not attending to structures, relations, and the characteristics of our team, we're not maximizing our ability for knowledge to flow and to influence performance. So here are some things. One of the first things that predicts team performance is team cohesion and trust. Trust is something that grows over time on teams. A retired Army Lieutenant General said it best. When you form a team, why do you form a team? Because teamwork builds trust, and trust builds speed. All of what we know about great teams applies equally in a whole variety of settings. Great teams share important characteristics like trusting each other and having team cohesion and having esprit de corps, having a sense that you belong to a team and that you are contributing to it. Here's some acrobats who are bouncing on each other. It's kind of dark here. I'm not sure that you can see that this woman has no feet on the ground and one hand here, and she's balanced on the hands of those other women, right? That is trust. The trust that she displays on the top of that pyramid is all of these. She's calculating the risk, which is very low because she knows them and has done this 100 times. Competence-based, she has confidence in their abilities. and identity-based. They all identify as members of the team and of the circus and of being in the same performance. The woman on the top of that pyramid could not come and do that with two of you in this room. Even if you had the capacity to bend yourself backwards like the woman on the bottom of the pyramid who's holding two other people above her, right? So all of us are doing this in our teams all the time, and trust is something that grows. This did not happen the first time they met, right? This is what grows. So how do you build it? One of the limnology teams I love asked me, how did we do it? We published 2 articles with 60 or more co-authors. How did we do it? And we didn't know, so we surveyed them and asked a whole bunch of questions. And the first thing we discovered is how much trust existed in that network. This is a group of 60 or more authors who had not ever published together before. But when we asked them, who do you trust, this is what it looks like. You can see there's a dense core in the middle, and then there are some pendants. There are notably no isolates in this network, so they didn't get trimmed out or not visualized. There are no isolates in this network. So some people have only one trust tie to someone in the network, but most people have 2 or 3 or 5 or 12 people in the network that they trust. So if they've never all worked together, and not all 60, some off of them are not a team, right? This is a publication outside of team structure. How did they do it? Where did it come from? So we asked them a whole bunch of other questions, and we found that their trust built from joint projects. There's an article that got published in the early part of this century based on bibliometrics, and it's called Team Assembly and scientific productivity or something like that. I was so excited when I read it, and then I was like, this is limited data, a selective sample of people who have published together. This is not team assembly. This is publication membership. I was so frustrated because I'm a social scientist who observes the world and watches teams assemble and thinks about the rules and the social negotiation. I was like, you can't tell team assembly from those publications, but here we can, right? Because we surveyed every single person on this big team, 60-something, and we asked them all of these things. What are the things that predict your trust and willingness to share data for a 60-something paper, for a global ecology paper? And they told us that in pairs and in trios, they had heard of each other, met each other at a conference, knew each other. So these joint projects looked like a lot of different things. They weren't all joint publications. But you can see how much more predictive joint publications were than any of the other things, sharing data, being friends, being mentors, being leaders. Advice is the second one that predicted trust. So I go to you for advice, and I've worked with things on you before. We know that trust builds over time. The social scientists know it starts with a little bit, and each time you work together, it builds. So the theory says when you work together, it builds trust. And then this data, with 60 new co-authors on a brand new project, tells us that that's the biggest predictor. We've been looking at teams for a long time at CSU, since the vice president for research started investing in teams. And I wanted to understand, how do teams develop? In what order do they do these various things so that we can build interventions and educational things that help them? So we built this survey, Teaming Readiness, which asks people to report to us how their team is performing. So I'm inspired by my team. I'm confident about them. My team communicates. I trust them. I have role clarity. So these are the kinds of questions that we ask. And what we're looking for here is agreement. So we want the red and the pink bars to get up to like the 80% range. So you can see this is kind of a moderate team here. I meant to show it to you like that, but I messed up the animation, so you didn't see that to begin with. So we're looking for agreement. So this one's kind of moderate. So here's a team that told me they were really, really struggling with team management. So I got brought in to consult with them, and I said, hey, how's it going? And they're like, we're passionate, we're excited, we're really energized by this team. And I was like, well, let's do this assessment and see what comes out. So they've got trust down, right? They trust the team, it's supportive, they're open to criticism, they have psychological safety, all the things that predict good team. But not looking great here. Fun meetings, clear roles, my expertise is important. Okay, they're at 80% on that one, but they still have some people who strongly disagree that their expertise is important to their team. What are you doing? If any member of your team doesn't say, I agree with this statement, I mean, maybe you're new and you agree instead of strongly agree like me. I'm super enthusiastic, right? Like I leave room for people that are, a little less over the top than me. But you should never have anyone who strongly disagrees that their expertise matters to the team. This is a problem. So we did find that these develop in an order. That trust begins first, then people get clear about the vision and start to articulate that it's shared. Then they build shared language together. Then they deepen their understanding of each other's skills. But these are the ones that people need help with all the time. Good meetings, effectiveness, clear roles, and understanding how to contribute, right? So like, if your rules are not clear, people are not contributing. And you can see that here, right? That's the lowest one. People are not contributing to the team because they don't know what role they should have. And they don't know if their expertise matters. Not awesome. So this group is kind of on it. They're like, if you draw a line down and make sure you like cover all the red and pink, they're like at 60% agreement. That's a like nascent team. Yeah.
Is it okay to ask questions during the talk?
Yeah.
Just wondering what you think would happen with that previous team to the trust. Would it eventually go away because of the other issues? Or?
They're in the process of a reorganization and like revisioning. At that point, they have to revision and restructure. The next step for them is visioning and structuring and like role clarity. If they don't do that, then they're going to cease to be a team. It doesn't matter how much they love each other and that they feel open because they're not getting anything done. Yeah. So there are different interventions at different stages, so that team has a particular problem. And the great news is they trust each other. It's like if you don't trust each other, I kind of can't help you. If you have that, you have the foundation and I can help you. So this is a team that, also is ready for like a visioning intervention workshop to help them bring in those people that, the team is not quite moving forward the way they want to. We also know that diversity predicts team performance. Now, we talked about this earlier this morning, that diversity is associated with team performance, but only when it's well managed and only when you have psychological safety. So that team we just saw, they have psychological safety in spades, and they have really good diversity, but they're missing some important stuff. But let's look at interdisciplinary diversity for a minute. Some fields are more interdisciplinary than others. This is from an article published in 2015. So up here on the top, the far corner, references to outside disciplines, social studies of medicine. I love the social scientists are represented, Health in general is very interdisciplinary, but some not so much, like nursing, less interdisciplinary. Clinical medicine, nuclear and particle physics, let me tell you, team science teams that are led by physicists are my biggest challenge. There are physicists that I love. I know that's like, I have friends. But as a discipline, they're rough to work with because it's just not baked into their DNA like it is with social work. I don't know. There are so many studies that document that diversity improves team performance. The gender diversity of your team, racial diversity, all of the like demographic characteristics of diversity on teams, disciplinary diversity, political views, geography, all of these things. Because diversity impacts team performance because it brings new ideas into a space. And one of the fundamental foundational processes of innovation is bringing an idea from one space and applying it to a new topic. And so that's how diversity works on teams. But if you don't have psychological safety for people to share, then their bright idea about how something that they did in some other space applies to this science problems doesn't have the opportunity to arrive. At the university level, this matters a lot. I already said interdisciplinarity is hard. It doesn't review well, it takes longer to get published, and it also doesn't look great on people's early career results. But if you look at it over time, those articles have the biggest impact. So they have lower impact in the short term and a bigger impact in the long term. which means our metrics for evaluating scientists need to shift from impact and citation in the short term to valuing simply interdisciplinarity as a metric in and of itself. I am only a full professor because I am in a department that says, we don't care where you publish, Jeni, as long as you publish in a peer-reviewed journal. And I am not kidding you. When my tenure proposal went up, one of my articles was published in the Journal of Professional School Counseling. That's people who are school counselors for a living. That's not sociology, really, in any way, right? And in environmental soc, and in, I don't know, the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, kind of related to sociology. So if I had a soc department that cared about me being published in top-tier journals in soc, I would not have gotten tenure. And then when I went up for a full and was published in 13 disciplines, I wouldn't have been there either. I was in a department that values any kind of science. And that's theorists who publish in mainstream journals, that's people who do only applied stuff, and that's people like me who only publish in interdisciplinary spaces. So that's one way our metrics need to shift, is towards the simple valuing of interdisciplinarity. Now, there's some really heartbreaking news about this. One of my colleagues, Boz Hofstra, published an article in 2020 he called the diversity innovation paradox in science. People who come from minoritized statuses, which is your demographic status and how it's valued or not valued in society, innovate at higher rates than majority students. And this is regardless of the field. So in nursing, men are minorities in the field of nursing, right? Women are minorities in society at large. So minoritized groups innovate at higher rates. Their contributions are discounted and less likely to earn them academic positions, fellowships, recognitions, awards. And that discounting continues to maintain their underrepresentation and limits the diversity in science. So science is being disserved by this innovation paradox. This is what the graphs look like from that publication. So here we see gender-specific novelty, majority in orange and minority in blue. And whether they become research faculty, so this is gender, this is race, this is continuing their research, and this is also so gender and race again. So people make more novel contributions, but they're under-recognized and less likely to get ongoing support. So unless we are intentionally working on this problem and looking at all of the ways that we can undo this in our interactions and in our teams and how we reward people and recognize them, we're going to keep perpetuating the system that we have in science. We also have big inequities in science. Women do more service. They're more likely to volunteer, they're more likely to say yes when asked directly, and they're more likely to be asked. So whenever I hear someone say, "Dear young sociology woman, just say no," I want to slap them. Because the sociological literature says whenever there is a problem that many people are facing, it is not an individual problem, it is a societal problem. So more women are asked, they're more likely to say yes, and they're more likely to volunteer. That is an institutional and organizational problem. That is not an individual woman problem. Racial minorities also face another tax. They are consistently asked to do more service. So women of color are double taxed, and then they are less recognized. And they want to take on service in the organization because they want to make change. So now they're in a double bind. They're trying to change the organization that is really not helping them. So the recent literature on this talks about this as non-promotable tasks. So how do you think about this in science? What are we asking people to do that are not associated with recognition and reward and career advancement and assessment in people's portfolios? Much of the work of building great teams is the network weaving that makes teams strong, and that is entirely invisible work. It's not measured, it's not metriced, it's not noticed, but it's really important work that makes science work because now we're working in teams. So this is the most heartbreaking thing. Anybody who's a senior scientist in the room, you need to pay attention to this right now. Men are given more credit for service and mentoring by their external letter writers. Any man does a little bit of service and gets high praise in his promotion materials. I just went through this. I just wrote letters of recommendation for people in my department and in others to become full, right? And men get a whole ton of praise. Women don't get praised for the same or higher levels of service. So that's specific recognition that we're doing. Then the second is that women who delay their tenure clock just because they delayed it, like you had kids, are less likely to get a unanimous vote, that it brings an implicit bias in, it causes us to question. And the same is true for anyone in a minoritized status. If they didn't go through fast, we question whether they're really committed, whether they're doing good work, and then we've tasked them with service that's not promotable, and we're not rewarding that. So one of my students, when I taught sociology of deviance, I send my students out to do observations, and I had a guy in my class, and he said, "Hey, Dr. Cross, I want to modify your assignment. I want to follow my friend around, who's a single mom, and I want to observe how people react to her out in public with her son. And then I want to flip the tables, and I'm going to have her videotape me doing all the same errands with her son, and then I'm going to code them afterwards." And it was like the most enraging, horrifying, reality show you've ever seen, right? Of people like, "Oh, you're such an amazing dad. Oh, you're taking your kid to the grocery store. Oh, look at you engaging with your kid. Oh, you're holding his hand and carrying him." Well, this is what we do for men who do service, is we're like, "Oh, you're so great." And then we let the dinosaur in my department just check off service every year that puts it down on everybody else, and we don't even hold him accountable. So we're kind of destroying from the insides our ability to form networks in an era where we need each other and teams more. So this is my little spiel to you on, if you are in a position of power, how are you contributing to this? And how can you change it? And how can you change it without putting it on the people that are being tasked with the extra work? So there are some fixes. One is in authorship agreements for team science, there's a new framework called the credit taxonomy, which is contributions, right? It's a taxonomy for contributions in science. This is the first move we need to make. It's no longer authorship, right? It is now contributions. And the contributions to science getting done go way beyond writing articles. We are not sitting in our offices anymore reading the works of the great dudes and spinning up our own theories and then spitting it out. That's authorship, right? We are now doing science in teams. And so science in teams needs to have the regular stuff, acquiring funding and doing supervision and doing the writing. But it also needs to include these other things. Recognizing every role on your team and in your science that requires relational labor. Figure out where it is and figure out where to put it. So one of my favorites is women who coordinate extraordinary international field sampling campaigns every year. What does it take to take students into the field into another country? It takes relationships. It takes trust with other scientists. So it's not just administrative, right? It's actually relationship building. And if you don't think that those coordinators deserve to be listed on every publication that includes the data that got pulled out of the field, you are misunderstanding what it takes to accomplish team science. On one of the big teams I'm on, because I'm a team scientist and I'm written into the grant as a co-PI, every publication that comes out of the field seasons while I'm there, because I'm on the coordinating team, I get a little email that says, "Hey, Jenny, so-and-so is getting ready to publish something with a whole bunch of words I can't even pronounce. Do you want to be a co-author or not?" If you want to be a co-author, so we call this the opt-in strategy. So I'm in the coordinator list and we all get asked because we're doing this emotional labor, relational labor. I'm coaching and mentoring those teams even though I don't know anything, about methane, right? So I opt in not to very many of them, but when I feel like I've put real labor in, then I do. So I want you all to think about contributions and authorship in a new way as part of the ecosystem of team science. All right, Other things we know influence the performance of teams, flat teams. I love computer scientists. I didn't used to love them so much, but now I do. Because now they're doing science that really is better than the old bibliometric stuff. So whether or not teams are hierarchical or flat makes a difference. We know it changes how people feel. We know that even participation improves trust. But now we actually have some evidence from the publication world. So L equals 1, that's the ratio of a flat team. So teams that have a 1 are flat teams. Teams that have 0.1 are hierarchical. And the leaders are doing a certain kinds of publishing, but then asking other people just to do supportive roles, right? And keeping them in the supportive space. So if we think about hierarchical versus not hierarchical teams, what we find is that the less hierarchical teams, the flatter ones, this red, they have more novel contributions and less developmental, right? So this is higher impact. So the flatter your team, the more novel the science you produce. This one, so this is super interesting. Leaders on flat teams, that reduces their scientific productivity individually, as individuals. But it increases the productivity of all the other authors. So we were talking about this morning. There are some people who do network analysis on basketball teams and have found that people who help the team perform, their own stats you can't tell. But if you look at the stats of their team when that person is on the court, their team performs better. So flat teams, the whole team is more productive. And then more long-term impact. So this is a different study, different sample, different methods. Same thing as that screen that you saw a while ago. So flat teams produce better, more impactful science and support all the scientists. So the old model of being an individual leader and having amazing stats of your own is not only old and outdated, but it is also particularly gender biased. That men self-cite themselves more. They cite their women mentees less. They cite their students who are from racially minoritized group. They cite them less. And so their publication records are less. So we should be having new metrics of teams about team performance and not about individual impact and individual citation records. And that's a flip from how we've thought about science and measuring it. Yeah?
On the less productive lead authors, I could imagine that having differential impacts based on gender as well and minority status.
Imagine, it probably does. Yes. Miraculously, in my department and university, where I'm not a super producer, right, I'm still valued because we have different metrics for interdisciplinarity, for community-based research, right? So I have standards that at my university I can excel on. But if you compared me to the men who are selfish in my department, my stats don't look like theirs. So yes, it absolutely is detrimental if women are leading teams. And we're using the old stats to recognize some people. Yeah. Here's one of my hierarchical teams. They look kind of connected, but I want you to notice what we did, something that's unique here. So this is a diagram of the network, and these are their collaboration ties. So everybody who's done any kind of scientific collaboration with somebody else, written a paper, a poster, processed data, shared information, whatever. We asked them how do they feel about their team. I am inspired by the vision of this team. This is a team who got a capacity building grant but did not get the big bet that they went after for team science. What do you notice? What's wrong here? So, yeah, Tony.
Oh, I was going to say the middle people are the yeses. I mean, there's some yeses on the outside, but all the middles are yes, and most of the no's are on the outside.
Yeah. So this is that same data that you saw before in the did you get to 80% agreement, right? So they're not at 80%, but importantly, when we visualize that same data on the network, this is what you get. So shout out to one of our doctoral students. He's the one who produced this visualization for me. I wasn't doing this. he was doing it when we taught him how to visualize networks. He's like, hey, Dr. Cross, what happens if we put the attitudes as node attributes? I was like, I don't know what happens. And I was like, oh my God, my most hierarchical team that I want to strangle, it's totally visible, which is why I love network analysis, because it makes visible what people can sense and talk about and describe for their team. But if people can't visualize it, they don't think that it's real. So that's one of the cool things about network analysis, is that if you do a good visualization, it makes it real, that this is a hierarchical team. The middle thinks this team is rocking. I'm inspired by the vision. I'm sorry, you should be at 80%. You're putting in for a $20 million NSF fund. Everyone should be saying they agree. I feel clear about my role. Oh, look. Clarity about your role and excitement about the vision, also not great. So when this one went in, some of my friends emailed me and said, I really hope we don't get funded. And I was like, I really don't think you have a chance. And they didn't. So what's the fix? When you have really hierarchical teams that are dysfunctional, the fix is new leadership. Here's a great example of a team in their pre-collaboration, hardly connected to each other at all, got funding from the college, and a super high mucky-muck, highly recognized, distinguished professor left the university. And who took over this team? But a lowly assistant professor who was a woman. The PI who left was also a woman, so not really a gender change, but a real attitude shift and a much more collaborative team afterwards. The other thing that predicts team performance is even participation. So Anita Woolley identified this back in 2010, and study after study in context after context says that teams where everyone feels like they can contribute and their contribution is valued and they have high levels of psychological safety are the highest performers, right? And this goes back to flat teams, right? Even participation in flat teams go hand in hand. You can't be flat if not everybody participates. So here's the really bad data of a super dysfunctional team. We were talking this morning about what are you doing if people are not contributing. So this is a team that needed intervention. This person needed to be removed from the team. And so this is just what one meeting of theirs looked like, but after 4 of these, we were like, you can't keep funding this team because this dude is actively destroying the ability of people to participate. Yeah, this woman, all of those 17 minutes were her trying to redirect the conversation. You guys have seen this. So this is based on observational data, turn taking, where we painstakingly documented how many seconds each person was talking and what kind of contribution it was, like adding on, questioning, bringing somebody else into the loop, all the things, yeah. So this one is really there for humor. We also discovered that it's not just flat teams and it's not just the proportion of women, which is what Anita Woolley found out. We actually discovered that it's the centrality of women. So women who are central leaders in a team help transform those team dynamics, help them be less hierarchical, help there to be more even turn-taking, better sharing. But the women are central in the network, both in the scientific publication network and in the social support and advice and mentoring that's happening in networks. And we found this over and over on teams. So just to summarize, these are the things that make better team performance: cohesion, diversity, flatness, centrality of women, and the interaction norms. Are you actually really supporting and encouraging the participation from the diverse team members? So just a little bit about IRIS. We do a whole bunch of team science, work with teams from evidence-based interventions to evaluation and assessment, like you just saw, and social surveys, network analysis. So this is what we've been doing since 2015 because there's a space, because people need this, because large teams are not something that we've been taught how to manage, how to grow. Some of us are good at it intuitively. Others of us are just struggling. When I started doing team science training, I have some women in their 40s that I'm coaching, and every time we do a team science session, they're like, why did I learn this a decade ago? Why am I learning this now? I needed this a decade ago. So I showed you that slide on the characteristics for teams. but team leaders need new coaching and training, and we're really lagging behind because our organizations don't have it. Research in other spaces, in companies, have full teams, and they all have project managers, and they have leadership and development coaching. Academic institutions are way, way behind the times, and even though we get to be entrepreneurial and do like fun things, we're actually still really behind the boat on figuring out how to do teaming in service of better science. So we're in a new era, and we're just beginning to understand what we need to do that well. So I promised I'd say a little bit about interventions. These are some of the interventions we created. So one of them, last year, every single big team I was working with, at about the 2-year point, said, Dr. Cross, we are so frustrated. These meetings are making us crazy. And we said, okay, you're not running effective meetings. So we created a whole workshop on running effective meetings. And just last week, I was talking to one of the teams, and I was like, yeah, bring a video back up again. I got to watch it like every 6 months because I seriously am so bad. I have to constantly be reminded how to do it well, which I think is very cute and funny. But like, I wish that people didn't feel like that was not intuitive, or that they didn't know, or they were never taught. So my leaders are early career faculty who are teaching their grad students. They're like, oh yeah, I got this, and now I'm teaching my students, and now I'm putting them in charge. So think about that. All right. I don't know. We have a few minutes for questions.
All right, let's thank Jeni.
So, I'm struggling with the gender thing, right? Because it's not like I have genes that make me socially sensitive or
No.
approachable. Or
But you've been socialized and rewarded and expected to do it. I mean,
not in academia. So, like, how do we?
in your social life, in our culture,
Right.
in this culture, women have been taught not to rock the boat, to make nice, to have good relationships. When I was in grad school, I was bike riding with a friend, and it was all men. And I was like, you guys, I can't deal with Mark. And they're like, well, yeah, Jeni, because you're way, way too competitive. And I was like, how so? I was like, you guys need to pay attention and observe a little bit more. So I'm just riding my bike, and the second I would get, so in cycling, it's called half wheeling. When you're in a pace line, you're supposed to be even with the person next to you, right? So I would come up to Mark, and I'd be even. We're supposed to be leading the pack, but Mark always half-wheeled me, right? And if I tried to keep him from half-wheeling me, like what you're supposed to do in a pace line and on a team is be even, he would get mad, and he would be like, Trini is always pushing the pace. And it took the other guys to watch, and they're like, no, Mark's legitimately mad at you all the time for trying to be even with him, and he defines that as being too assertive, too aggressive. So then you learn to back off, and you're like, oh, right? So women are not inherently more collaborative than men, but we are taught to, and we are rewarded for being that. And I don't know why. I do this all the time with students, but women tell me that they want their relationships to be reciprocal. Now, I don't know where that comes from, and the data on this shows that adding women to a team improves social sensitivity and improves chart taking, but men are also likewise rewarded for being competitive, for being top dog, for being the other thing. That does not mean that these are not skills that men can't learn. They're absolutely teachable skills, and when you teach everyone to be it, there are some amazing men on the teams that I coach, and absolutely everyone can be even participatory, recognizing. And we still have implicit bias, where anytime a man does that, we're going to be like, oh, you are so good at bringing people into the team. And then for women, we're like, don't you think that was a little bossy? Maybe your tone it down, right? So we're still going to face that, patting men on the back for being nice and encouraging women to tone it down. Yeah. It's not biological. Just like all of the health inequities are not about the biology of race, they are about the sociology of race.
Because that seems important, right?
Yes.
I could see someone coming away from the results and thinking, we just need teams of women, and let's kick men out of academia. But I think that's not what you're saying.
Teach men not to be buttheads.
Let's train everyone not to be a butthead.
Exactly.
Not that men are all buttheads.
They're not. No, I was just saying that's the counter,
They
right?
can be butt heads too.
They absolutely can, and they certainly are.
Yes, they are.
Sometimes. We all can be.
Do you think about women to be like other women?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about like how to operationalize some of this data you're collecting around team performance.
Yeah.
In giving that feedback back to a team, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty tricky, right? That
It's actually pretty fun.
great.
Like all those graphs that I showed you, like we do it for teams, and we never just like hoard it and hide it, right? Like the point about data about teams is to share it back with them. Teams love it. So here's one of the teams. So this is their collaboration. So this is their scientific collaboration colored by their different disciplines because our VPR, wants to measure this. So this is their collaboration network growing. This is their learning from network growing, right? This is what we want to see on the right, is people learning across the fields. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking, when you're done,
Okay.
was formulating my question.
This morning we talked about energize, who energizes you. So you can see it's the ag scientists that are actually energizing this team. No surprises of food systems team, right? So the statisticians are like showing up and helping, but they're not the ones that like mobilize and energize. So not everybody, should be the energizer on a team. And mentoring is still pretty late on this team. I don't know what's going on with this. I think that people interpreted this as like official mentor. This is one of the data points where I was like, I don't know what's happening here. So we give people this data and they love it. They like to talk about it. They want to think about what does it mean. This morning we talked about weaving your networks. We always use this in conjunction with a conversation about what's working well, how do we improve it, what does the network tell us about how the team can grow and improve. So we also are building a dashboard like this that lets you see this is the whole university, and then a program, and then a person. And you can see the roles at the bottom. So this shows graduate students, postdocs, early career, late career, so that we can understand the difference that different roles that people in different roles in the university make. You had a question?
Yeah, can you comment on the generational differences? Because Gen Z, like I teach implicit bias in some of my classes, for example, some of the attitudes that they come into can be quite different than, older individuals, even just hearing the word implicit bias for some, like boomers can be challenging.
Triggers them.
But Gen Z is all, like there's most of my students, their scores look great on like these implicit bias tests. Like some of the generational things I think are quite different. So stages of change maybe would be a better way to talk about that. Like,
Yeah.
Can you comment just on like
Yes, there are generational differences. Yes, it matters. Like if the people leading your team are boomers and they struggle with that, right, then that team needs work. But if you have a mostly younger team, and then it's not kind of an important dynamic. So those are kind of assessments. But even with my teams that look good, we still have to talk about how people create structures that let women volunteer. So I had a big fight with my department chair over writing the letters for promotion, because once we had enough women, they started doing it, and then the men just stopped volunteering and didn't do it at all. And I said, you can't let this be a volunteer situation. You're stressing the women out over all these menial tasks in the department. Just make it on a rotating basis. And so some of the things that are our bias in science, like having women do all that non-promotable work, like it doesn't advance my career to write 5 letters for full, which I just did last week, right? It's not helping me. It's good for science, but it's not good for me. I just made a spreadsheet. It was not hard. Who wrote how many letters in 2019? Who wrote how many letters in 2020? And then when you're sitting around the table, then women aren't stressed out. They look at it and they're like, hey, Mike, you haven't written a letter since 2017. You're on deck, dude. So some of it is, really thinking about the context and the people and how do you fight that inertia the way we've always done it.
So I had a related question that I think maybe you just answered, but it was what, if anything, is most effective in helping some of the senior people see some of these blind spots? Like when you propose a spreadsheet, people are like, why would we do that? We've never done that.
Yeah.
What's that going to show?
Yeah, okay, so this is in the leadership workshop for team science. There are 4 moves on any team. It's called the floor player model. And all of you need to learn this. So move number 1 is to move. I'm going to take a step in this direction, right? I'm going to suggest we build a spreadsheet, right? That's a move. The second move is a follow, right? So I say we build a spreadsheet, and you've agreed with me before the meeting that you're going to follow. You're going to say, yes, build a spreadsheet. You're the 80-year-old dude who thinks that you can check off your stuff. You're not even at this meeting because you were heard in the hallway before this meeting saying, service is women's work. Why would I go to the service equity meeting? So you're not there. But you're the next in line, and you, every time I suggest let's do the spreadsheet, you're like, I don't see this as a problem. But you're the other woman who agreed with us ahead of time. And so every time he counters, that's the third move, a counter, right? You follow again. So we go to a meeting and we know what movement we want to have, and we agree. I'm going to move because I'm never afraid to move. I'm a mover. And all the women who are more shy than me agree to counter every counter, right? To follow me on every move. And that's how we make change. The fourth play on any team is to be the observer. And you're an effective observer if you watch the dynamics and then you weigh in and help the team change. Tony, this is being a network weaver, right? Good weavers are observers, and then they match people and encourage new action. Teams are effective when people rotate through those roles. So that hierarchical team, the dude who had a really clear vision, he always moves. He tells everybody where the team is going, where they're going to move, what we're going to do, right? Any ideas from the periphery, all those people in red, they have no chance of going anywhere. So ineffective teams, individual people get stuck in one of those 4 moves. Good teams, everybody rotates through the 4 moves. So you can observe what you're doing on your teams. And when you're trying to make change, you know you're going to have a hard conversation with the dudes about service inequity, and you uncover that the service inequity is not 2 to 1 like you thought it was, it's 10 to 1. Yeah, women were doing 10 times as much work as men. Then you strategize how to change it. And the 4 moves will make you through any meeting if you have at least 3 people to follow a mover.
So that was my question. Was there a minimal number that was needed? You just mentioned 3, but it also seems as if there needs to be some level of consensus building before that particular session to know, okay, you know what, somebody's going to be the mover, and everyone else who's going to be participating
Yes.
knows that, okay, here are our various roles, so clear roles to say, here's our larger objective, we're going to support, and
Yes.
crashing it's going to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and notably the chair, who was a man, also supported my move. Like when people said, well, I don't know if we should build a spreadsheet, that could take us forever. The chair was like, we agreed to be here all day. How about we try it? Let's see how far we can get in this retreat that we're having. So yes, when you know it's going to be a hard conversation, and anybody can do this, even people who think they don't have power, graduate students on teams, can plan against their hierarchical, annoying leader and suggest a new direction and support each other. And if you're sitting across the room from each other, then it makes it feel like there's much more consensus. So 3 of you can shift the room.
So this is taking us back to that concept of trust,
Mm-hmm.
how important that is in teams. I guess how successful have you seen teams be dismissing a member of the team based on trust? Because in my experience, we have to face these kinds of things on more quantitative type of metrics than, hey, everybody gets the heebie-jeebies from this person.
Yeah.
Heebie-jeebies being a general.
Right, some kind of general amorphous thing.
Catch-all for the bad vibes. So.
Yeah. There's usually something more behavioral in nature, that it's not just I get the bad vibes from this person. So, I don't know. I haven't actually personally led an intervention to remove a person related to bad vibes. I don't have particular expertise, but we have removed someone who had really observed behavior that were destructive to the team. So usually that's best coming from a leader and like a private conversation, not in public. I mean, I've participated in removing people from teams, right? And how do you communicate it to them? Like, it's not in the best interest of the team. I don't know. All right. We're on the hour. Yeah, we're already late. You guys are late for whatever your classes are. So thanks for hanging out longer to